Karen's anger had been building for weeks. Every argument, every threat, every note on our door. But today, she went too far. My mom only told her to stop yelling at the neighborhood kids. Karen's face twisted with rage. "You think you can talk to me like that?" She hissed. Before I could move, she pulled out a gun and fired. The shot echoed down the street. My mom fell, blood staining the white fence behind her. Karen stood frozen, smoke curling from the barrel, pride flickering in her eyes. She thought she'd won, but what she didn't know was that the woman she shot was the mother of an FBI agent. And tonight, justice wouldn't come from a badge, it would come from me. Before the story unfolds, comment below which country you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more unbelievable HOA stories. Karen had always been the storm in our quiet neighborhood, the kind of woman who thrived on control and chaos. Every morning, she would march down the street with her clipboard like a soldier enforcing her own laws. My mom used to smile when she saw her coming, a gentle patience in her eyes that I never understood. "Let her talk," she'd say. "Some people need to feel important." But I could see the fatigue behind her kindness. Karen's voice was poison that seeped into every corner of our street, and my mom was her favorite target. It started with harmless notes tucked under our door, small complaints about our grass being too long, our mailbox being too short, or the shade of blue on our shutters. But over time, the notes became threats. "Change it or I'll report you." This neighborhood has standards. I told my mom to let me handle it, to call the authorities, but she just laughed softly. "Sweetheart, she's just lonely." Lonely wasn't the word I'd have used. There was something else in Karen, a bitterness that grew sharper every time someone stood up to her. I'd seen that look before in interrogation rooms, in suspects who believed they were untouchable. My instincts screamed that she wasn't just angry, she was unstable. I had been trained to read danger in body language, in tone, in small cracks that others missed, and everything about Karen's behavior told me that one day she would snap. That day came faster than I expected. The afternoon sun was sinking, and the light turned the white fences gold. I was inside working on a report when I heard shouting outside. My mother's voice, calm and steady as always, was met by Karen's shrill rage. I stepped to the window and saw Karen standing at the edge of our yard, her face red, her jaw tight, clipboard clutched like a weapon. "You think the rules don't apply to you?" she screamed. My mom stood at the porch steps, her hands raised in peace. "Karen, please go home. This isn't worth it." But reason was useless against someone who had already decided she was the victim. Karen took a step closer, her voice cracking with fury. "I've had enough of your attitude." The veins in her neck pulsed as she pointed toward the flag waving gently beside the porch, the one my father had carried through his service, the one my mom refused to take down no matter how many warnings she got. Karen's obsession with it had become personal. "Take that flag down," she demanded, "or I swear you'll regret it." I moved toward the door, every muscle in my body tightening. I'd handled armed fugitives and violent suspects, but the sight of that woman yelling at my mother filled me with a different kind of fear. The helpless kind. My mother shook her head, her tone firm but soft. "Karen, this is my home. Leave now." The next moment unfolded in slow motion. Karen's hand went to her purse. I thought maybe she was grabbing another warning notice, another letter to pin to our door. But then I saw it. The metallic glint that froze my blood. My training recognized it before my mind did. "A gun, Mom!" I shouted, but the word barely left my mouth before the world erupted. The crack of the gunshot tore through the quiet like a thunderclap. Birds scattered from the trees. The neighbor's blinds snapped shut. My mom's body jerked, her eyes wide with disbelief. The sound echoed off the walls, then everything fell silent except for the ringing in my ears. I ran, my heart pounding harder than it ever had in combat. She was on the ground, blood soaking through her blouse, spreading fast across the green grass. I dropped to my knees, pressing my hands against the wound, feeling her warmth slipping away. "Mom, stay with me, please!" My voice broke, the training forgotten, the agent gone. Just a son begging the universe not to take his mother. Karen stood frozen a few steps away, the gun still in her trembling hand, smoke curling lazily from the barrel. Her expression wasn't guilt, it was satisfaction. Like she had finally won a battle she'd been fighting in her mind for months. "You should have listened," she said coldly. I looked up at her, my hands covered in blood, rage clawing its way through my chest. Every instinct screamed at me to act, to stop her, but years of discipline held me still. Not yet, not here. The sirens hadn't started yet. The neighbors hadn't called. They were watching, whispering behind curtains, afraid of her, afraid of being next. Karen lowered the gun, tucked it back into her purse, and turned away, her voice steady. This could have been avoided. She walked back across the street as if nothing had happened. I stayed kneeling beside my mother until the last bit of warmth left her body. The street was silent except for the wind brushing against the flag she had refused to take down. That moment carved something deep inside me. The grief burned, but beneath it, something colder took root, a purpose sharper than pain. I wasn't just a son anymore. I was an FBI agent, and Karen had just made herself the center of my case. I promised my mother I'd keep her safe. I had failed once. I wouldn't fail again. The sound of the gunshot still echoed in my head long after the street had fallen silent. The ringing wouldn't stop. My hands were soaked in blood, my mother's warmth fading beneath my fingertips as the light in her eyes dimmed, one slow breath at a time. I whispered her name, begged her to hold on, but her lips only trembled without sound. I felt her last breath brush against my hand, soft, fleeting. And then there was nothing. The world seemed to fold in on itself, leaving only the silence. Karen didn't move. She stood just a few feet away, her arms slack at her side, the gun still in her hand. A faint line of smoke curled upward from the barrel, dissolving into the pale evening light. Her eyes weren't wild or panicked. They were calm, almost satisfied, like she had finally proven a point no one else could understand. "You should have listened," she muttered, her voice low, steady, poisoned with certainty. Then she turned, brushed a strand of blonde hair from her face, and walked back across the street like she hadn't just taken a life. Every cell in my body screamed to go after her, to grab her by the throat and make her see what she'd done. But something colder, something drilled into me from years in the bureau, forced me to stay still. Control the moment. Record everything. My mother's blood was evidence, her last words, silence, a testimony that I would not let fade. I took a breath, steadying my shaking hands, feeling the shift from grief to purpose. The neighbors were watching. I could see their silhouettes behind curtains, their eyes wide, their faces pale. Not one of them stepped outside. Not one voice called out. Fear ruled them the way Karen ruled them. She had built this neighborhood on intimidation. One complaint, one fine, one threat at a time, until everyone learned to stay quiet. They had given her power, and tonight she had shown them exactly how far she was willing to go to keep it. When the sirens finally came, their sound felt hollow. The flashing lights painted the fences red and blue, colors of authority that meant nothing anymore. The officers moved slowly, their questions mechanical, rehearsed. One of them approached me, his expression blank, his notepad ready. "What happened?" he asked, as if the gun still in Karen's purse didn't tell the story itself. "She shot my mother," I said, each word scraping out of my throat. Karen stood nearby, pretending to cry, her hands shaking just enough to look believable. "She came at me," she sobbed. "She tried to hit me. I was scared." Her voice cracked in just the right places, the way liars rehearse in mirrors. The officers exchanged looks, the kind that said, "This is messy, this is political, this is trouble we don't want." I could see it already, the narrative forming, the excuses writing themselves. They saw her not as a killer, but as a homeowner with influence, connections, and a reputation. I saw through her performance, every calculated tremor in her voice, every fake tear glistening under the red lights. My jaw tightened. I'd interviewed murderers who cried less convincingly. One of the officers stepped toward her and gently took the gun. "We'll sort this out," he said softly, almost apologetically, as if she were the victim here. I wanted to shout, to tear through their complacency, but I didn't. Not yet. The agent in me knew when to strike and then when to wait. I watched every move, memorized every face. This wasn't justice. This was theater. When they covered my mother's body, I stood in silence. I didn't cry. I couldn't. The grief had already turned into something sharper, something I could use. Karen glanced my way once as they led her toward the patrol car. She expected me to break down, to beg, to scream. Instead, I just stared back, steady and unblinking. Her smirk faltered for the first time. Hours passed before they left. The street fell back into its eerie calm, the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. I stayed there, alone on the front lawn, staring at the dried patch of blood beneath the porch light. The flag beside it fluttered gently, the same flag my mom had refused to take down despite Karen's threats. It stood taller than before, defiant in the night wind. I went inside, every step heavier than the last. The house smelled like her. Coffee, lavender, the faint trace of her perfume. But now it all felt wrong. I sat at the kitchen table where she used to sit every morning, her favorite mug still on the counter, half full from earlier. I stared at it until the first light of dawn crept through the blinds. Sleep didn't come. I spent the night replaying the moment over and over. The shout, the gun, the fall, the silence. I dissected every second, the way I'd been trained to analyze crime footage. The way her hand moved, the distance between them, the timing of the shot. All of it painted the same truth. My mother hadn't threatened her. She never even took a step forward. It was murder. By sunrise, I had already made my decision. I wasn't going to wait for the local police to build a weak case that would crumble under Karen's influence. I wasn't going to let another file gather dust while she smiled in her front yard. This was personal now, but it was also professional. Every emotion, every memory, every ounce of pain, I would channel it into precision. I opened my laptop and began to type. The first entry, incident report, unlawful homicide. Subject, Karen H. Weller, HOA president. My fingers moved with a steady rhythm, cold and mechanical, until the grief became fuel. Outside, the neighborhood was waking up. Cars pulled out of driveways, sprinklers turned on, dogs barked, life moved forward as if nothing had happened. But I knew nothing would ever be the same. Karen's house stood across from ours, blinds drawn, her shadow moving inside. She was free for now, pretending her world hadn't just ended. I looked out the window, my reflection faint in the glass. I didn't see the agent who had sworn to protect people like her. I saw a son who had been pushed past forgiveness, and somewhere deep inside, a quiet promise took root, a vow that by the time this was over, Karen would understand what justice truly meant. The officers spoke in calm, rehearsed tones, their questions clipped and careful, as if the truth might burn their hands if they touched it. Karen wept convincingly, her sobs calculated to pull sympathy, her eyes glistening in the streetlights.
She came at me, she said, shaking her head.
She threatened me. I had no choice. I was defending myself. Every word was a rehearsed performance, each pause timed perfectly. I watched, silent, my mind cataloging every flicker of her eyelids, every twitch of her mouth. She was good at pretending, but I had trained my whole life to see the cracks, to read the lies hidden beneath the surface. I saw them all, and I stored them. The officers nodded politely, jotting down notes, their expressions neutral, unreadable. I understood immediately. They were either complicit in her game or paralyzed by the weight of her influence in the neighborhood. HOA politics were subtle but potent, a web of intimidation disguised as rules and bylaws. Karen had mastered it over years, controlling homeowners, bending them without ever raising a hand. The same cunning that allowed her to manipulate adults now gave her the confidence to kill without immediate consequence. I moved closer to my mother, even though her body had long stopped trembling. Her presence was gone, but the warmth of her final breaths lingered like smoke in my memory. I examined the bloodstain, noting the pattern on the concrete, the way it spread outward in uneven rings. Each droplet told a story, the trajectory of the bullet, the angle of impact, the likely position Karen had been in when she fired. Every detail mattered, every second counted. I photographed the scene with my phone, careful to capture evidence the officers ignored. Powder residue on Karen's hands, the slight tilt of the gun as she pressed it into my mother's chest, the exact placement of the bullet casing. Small things that would later matter in court or in the hands of someone who understood truth, but which the casual officer would dismiss as trivial. I cataloged every angle, every detail, memorized the sequence of events, storing them in my mind like files in a case folder. This was no longer just a tragedy. It was a crime scene, a puzzle waiting to be solved. Karen glanced at me once, perhaps sensing my attention. I met her eyes without flinching. Her confidence wavered for the first time. I didn't need to say a word. The look in my eyes was enough. Years of FBI training, every interrogation technique, every moment of controlled intensity radiated from me. I was no longer her neighbor. I was the threat she had never considered. The subtle tremor in her hands, the way her lips pressed together, the faint furrow in her brow, all unspoken signs that her carefully constructed facade was cracking. The officers finally began taking statements from witnesses, a trickle of neighbors stepping forward hesitantly, their voices quivering as they recounted what they saw. Most stuck to vague descriptions, careful to avoid implicating Karen directly. Some claimed they didn't see anything. Others stumbled through fragmented recollections. I listened to them all, silently noting inconsistencies and embellishments. People fear power, and Karen wielded it like a sword. But fear could also be used against her, and I intended to do just that. I crouched by the bullet casing and studied it, running my fingers along its edges, feeling the faint heat lingering from the shot. The powder burns, the micro scratches on the surface, all of it would tell the truth if anyone cared to listen. And I would make sure someone did. The officers took photos, scribbled notes, and moved on, but I stayed behind, committed to absorbing every detail until it could no longer be ignored. I memorized the way Karen's hand had gripped the gun, the tension in her shoulders, the split-second decision that had ended my mother's life. Hours passed, the official investigation moving at a glacial pace while I silently reconstructed every moment. I replayed the sequence in my head. Karen's approach, the words exchanged, the slight tilt of her head, the flash of metal, the deafening report, the moment my mother fell. Every detail, every movement, every lie she whispered afterward, all would be used. By the time the officers finally left, Karen had returned to her house, her composure restored, acting as though she were the victim of circumstance. But I had seen the cracks, the hesitation, the fear beneath her mask. Her performance might fool others, but it would not fool me. I cataloged her every movement, every inflection, and every gesture. The memory burned into me, a permanent record of her arrogance and the violent truth beneath it. I gathered the physical evidence she left behind, her discarded gloves, the gun residue, even the tiny flecks of blood she hadn't noticed smeared on her sleeve, storing each item carefully. Every shred mattered. Every piece could be used. I had no intention of letting her hide behind lies and manipulations. This was no longer just a personal vendetta. It was an investigation, a mission, and I was fully equipped to carry it out with precision and resolve. By midnight, I had compiled a dossier in my mind and on paper, every observation, every contradiction, every detail that proved her guilt. I had also noted the social dynamics of the neighborhood, the fear she had instilled, and the ways she might attempt to twist her story to avoid responsibility. Karen had underestimated me. She had believed that her power and position could shield her from consequence. She had believed the rules, the law, and even basic morality would bend in her favor. But she had awakened the wrong enemy, the kind trained to see through lies, to anticipate deception, and to act decisively. I stepped back from the quiet house, the street empty except for the faint hum of distant traffic. Karen's shadow moved behind the blinds, unaware that her world had just shifted irreversibly. She thought she had won. She thought she had erased my mother and silenced the family that lived next door. She was wrong. This wasn't revenge yet. Not tonight. Tonight was planning, observation, documentation. Karen had shown the depth of her cruelty, and now it was my turn to show her the reach of discipline, skill, and justice. I would wait. I would watch. I would strike. And when that moment came, she wouldn't have a chance to plead ignorance or claim innocence. Every detail of tonight's events was preserved. Every action, every lie, every tremor of her hand, every false tear, all of it would ensure she could never escape accountability. She believed she controlled the neighborhood. She believed her power made her untouchable. She was about to learn just how wrong she was. The morning after the shooting, Karen was already back on her porch, coffee cup in hand, acting as if the previous night had been nothing more than a disagreement over fence colors. Her smile was smug, the same arrogance that had fueled every small cruelty in the neighborhood. My mother's blood hadn't even dried on the sidewalk, and yet Karen carried herself as though she had conquered some invisible battlefield. I watched from across the street, blending into the shadows, every muscle taut, every sense alert. I had faced killers, armed fugitives, and violent criminals in my career, but none had ever worn their cruelty like a badge the way Karen did. None had so casually dismissed the life of someone else as inconsequential. That night, when the sun disappeared behind the rooftops and the streetlights flickered on, I began the work that would ensure she could never escape. Cameras went up discreetly on the eaves of neighboring houses, pointed subtly toward her driveway, her front porch, her windows. Every entry, every exit, every gesture she made would be documented. I traced her calls, listening to the soft lies she told to her friends and acquaintances, the way she laughed at the chaos she had caused. She bragged about teaching a lesson, as if turning my mother's life into a weapon for her ego was something to celebrate. Every recorded word, every message, every keystroke was ammunition I would store in my memory and on devices hidden where she could never reach them. I hacked into her HOA emails, those thin threads of authority she had used to manipulate, control, and terrorize the neighborhood. Each email revealed a side of Karen most people never saw: cold, calculating, vindictive. She mocked the homeowners who complained, dismissed anyone who disagreed with her, and plotted petty punishments with the same glee one might reserve for winning a lottery. Her arrogance was a tool, and her cruelty was rehearsed, methodical, almost ritualistic. By the time I had cataloged her network, her friends, her communications, it became clear how she had managed to terrify so many into submission. She had woven fear into the neighborhood like thread through a tapestry, and she had no idea her every move was now being tracked, logged, and recorded. By the third night, I had gathered everything I could without alerting her: evidence, motive, and even confessions in her own words. Her arrogance was my ally. She never suspected that her casual boasts to friends, the subtle threats hidden in HOA correspondence, or the way she bragged about controlling others, would become a chain that would bind her. Every claim she made about self-defense was contradicted by video evidence, by phone calls, by the precise timing of her movements. I could see it all clearly in my mind, playing like a film in high definition. The angle of the gun, the moment she pulled the trigger, the time my mother fell, all recorded, all irrefutable. But that wasn't enough. Gathering facts alone could prove her guilt, but it wouldn't make her feel the weight of what she had done. She needed to understand, to sense the gravity of her actions, the pain she inflicted, and the justice that would come for her. This wasn't about vengeance in the emotional sense, it was about precision. The same meticulous planning I had applied in missions overseas, in operations where lives depended on every decision, would now be applied to her. I wanted her to comprehend in every fiber of her being that what she had done could not go unpunished, that her reign of fear, her casual cruelty, and her twisted sense of power had finally met an obstacle she could not manipulate or intimidate. I studied her routines, her friends' visits, the times she left the house, the way she handled deliveries and phone calls. Every predictable action became a pattern, every pattern a point of leverage. I didn't just need to be ready, I needed her to feel that readiness. My every movement, my every preparation, was designed to ensure that she would have no escape, no lies to hide behind. I memorized the exact placement of her doors, her windows, the angles from which she could be observed without detection. I traced escape routes, counted steps, measured sight lines, and noted her habits down to the smallest detail. Karen was meticulous, but she was blind to the one thing she had underestimated: me. Late that night, I set additional traps, subtle markers that would alert me to movement, hidden cameras that would record her every interaction, digital monitors to track phone usage, and microphones discreetly placed near the front door and garden. Even her HOA emails were being mirrored to a secure server, every message saved in real time. By the time I finished, I had a complete picture of her life, her actions, and her mindset. Every lie she could tell, every alibi she could attempt, had already been compromised by her own words and deeds. I reviewed the evidence over and over, committing every detail to memory. Her patterns, her boasts, her threats, everything she had done to assert control over the neighborhood, were now cataloged in perfect clarity. The files on my devices were only part of it. I had internalized every piece of information, every nuance of her character, every subtlety of her movements. I felt the cold satisfaction of preparation, the kind that only comes from knowing that when the time comes, there will be no room for error. Karen believed she had survived, that she had conquered yet another obstacle, that she had silenced opposition without consequence. But she had miscalculated. She had never encountered someone with the skills, discipline, and patience to study her, to anticipate her, and to act with precision. She had made herself the target. She had underestimated the consequences of her actions, and every boast, every threat, every laugh she had indulged in was now evidence, a testament to her guilt, and a warning to her that the reckoning was imminent. I spent the rest of the night reviewing, adjusting, and perfecting. The neighborhood slept, oblivious to the silent war being waged across their quiet streets. Karen had no idea she was being watched, no idea that the trap was complete, no idea that the woman she had attempted to destroy was the daughter of someone who would stop at nothing to deliver justice. Every camera, every message, every observation was a step closer to the day she would finally understand the full measure of her crimes. By the time the first rays of dawn crept over the rooftops, I was ready. Not for anger, not for revenge, but for precision. Karen had made herself the center of this operation, and I had built a complete dossier, a complete plan, a complete picture of her guilt and vulnerability. The stage was set, every move accounted for, every risk mitigated. The trap was ready. The reckoning would not be delayed. Karen had believed she controlled the neighborhood, but she had never controlled me. Tonight, she would learn exactly what it meant to misjudge the wrong person. Tonight, she would see that no amount of arrogance, manipulation, or intimidation could shield her from the consequences of her actions. And when it happened, she would understand, in every thought, in every movement, in every breath, that the world she had built on fear and lies was nothing compared to the force now poised to bring her down. The moon hung low over the quiet street, pale and unyielding, casting a cold light on everything it touched. Karen stood near her car, phone pressed to her ear, laughter spilling over the line in a way that made my blood boil. She didn't hear me approach at first. She was lost in her own sense of control, smug in her belief that no one could touch her. The moment her eyes met mine, her smile faltered for the briefest second, a flicker of uncertainty passing across her face. She quickly masked it with an exhale, tilting her head and forcing the laugh back into her voice as though she had been caught in a private joke, but I could see through it. "What do you want?" she snapped when I reached a few feet from her, voice sharp and defensive. Her hands gripped the phone tightly, knuckles white, the kind of tension that only comes when someone realizes they might be cornered. "You know what I want," I said quietly, every word deliberate, controlled. There was no emotion in my voice, not anger, not grief, just a precision honed over years of training, a calm that concealed the storm inside me. Every step I took toward her was deliberate, measured, designed to project authority and inevitability. She rolled her eyes, trying to mask the growing panic with disdain. "You people think you can scare me," she said, voice forced, defiant. I raised my badge, letting it catch the moonlight, a symbol she could neither argue with nor ignore. "You shot my mother in cold blood. You think you'll walk free?" My words were not a threat. They were a statement of fact. I had the evidence, the records, the photographs, the audio. Everything she had done, every boast, every lie, every malicious action was documented. She had underestimated me, and now she would face the consequences. Her face drained of color. "You're FBI?" she whispered, disbelief and fear mixing in a tone that was almost comical if it weren't so terrifying. "Not just FBI," I replied, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "Her son." The words hit her harder than any weapon could. Her breath caught, and her body betrayed her. Hands that had once held a gun with confidence now trembled, and her knees wavered just slightly as if gravity itself had betrayed her. She stumbled back, lips parting, eyes wide. "I didn't mean," she started, her voice breaking under the weight of the realization that her carefully constructed facade had just collapsed. "Save it," I said, stepping closer, voice steady and unyielding. I handed her a small flash drive, heavy with the evidence she couldn't escape. Every recording she had made, every laugh, every threat, every cruel word, all of it stored securely, indisputable. "You'll confess, or I'll make sure every agent in this state hears your name before sunrise. Every lie, every manipulation, every moment of malice you thought would go unnoticed. It's all here. And if you don't speak now, it will speak for you." Her eyes darted to the flash drive, and I could see the panic spreading across her features like wildfire. The laughter she had been so proud of just hours ago was gone, replaced with a desperate calculation, the frantic search for an escape that didn't exist. Every option she considered in that fraction of a second would fail. I had accounted for it all. There was no way out. The first tremor of tears appeared in her eyes. The mask of arrogance and control began to crumble, and I watched it happen with cold, surgical patience. She realized she was exposed, completely, and no amount of manipulation, no HOA authority, no twisted network of influence could save her now. The flash drive was the final piece of the puzzle, the embodiment of her own hubris, and I could see her mind racing as she tried to imagine how she could possibly spin the situation to her favor. You can't, she stammered, voice rising as fear replaced defiance. She glanced around, suddenly aware of the quiet neighborhood street, the distance between her and any potential witness or ally. The night had transformed, and she saw the truth for the first time. She was utterly, irreversibly vulnerable. I held her gaze, letting the silence stretch, forcing her to feel the inevitability of justice closing in. The moonlight illuminated every line of her face, every flicker of panic, every twitch of regret. The neighbors behind their curtains might have ignored her crimes before, but tonight she had no audience to shield her. The truth was inescapable, and she knew it. Her hands shook violently as she accepted the flash drive, fingers fumbling, and for a fleeting moment I saw the full weight of fear descend on her. Fear for her freedom, fear for her reputation, fear of the consequences she had so long believed she could evade. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words could come that would undo the mountain of evidence, the certainty of her guilt. I could have walked away then, left her to the realization and the inevitability of exposure. But there was a lesson that needed to be cemented. Every movement I made from that point on was deliberate, each one reinforcing that she was no longer in control, that the power she had wielded over neighbors, friends, and authority was nothing against the force of trained discipline and unyielding purpose. She realized fully now that her arrogance had blinded her, that her cruelty had marked her, and that her own actions had built the cage she now stood in. Every lie, every manipulation, every moment she had believed she was untouchable had been carefully documented, preserved, and cataloged. Her fate rested not on hope, not on luck, but on the cold, precise execution of justice. I took a slow step back, letting the full weight of the moment settle on her. "This ends tonight," I said, voice calm but sharp as a blade. "There's no more running, no more hiding, and no more lies. You will be held accountable for what you've done, and there will be no excuses." Her eyes widened in realization, the final barrier between denial and acknowledgement breaking. Karen had spent her life believing she was untouchable, that power, fear, and manipulation could shield her from consequence. Tonight, all of that dissolved in the face of one fact. She had crossed the wrong person, and the reckoning was complete. Her hands dropped to her sides, the phone slipping from her fingers. The laughter, the defiance, the smug confidence, all gone, replaced with a raw, trembling awareness of the truth she could no longer escape. And as I turned away, I knew she would never forget the lesson she had learned that night. The lesson that no amount of arrogance or cruelty could withstand the precision and patience of someone trained to see through lies and deliver justice. Karen had finally met the limits of her own power, and I had become the embodiment of the reckoning she had so desperately avoided. Karen didn't even have time to react when the officers arrived. Their sirens were muffled, low, almost discreet, but their presence was undeniable. She froze, hand still hovering near her purse, eyes wide as if trying to process the reality that the world she had built on fear was finally collapsing around her. No warnings, no negotiations, no rehearsed sobs, just the cold click of handcuffs against her wrists. Her smug confidence, her carefully crafted mask of control, shattered in an instant. She opened her mouth, probably to protest, to scream, to lie, but the sound never fully formed. Her voice cracked into nothing, swallowed by the certainty of her capture. The officers had their orders, precise and unambiguous, and they followed them without hesitation. One cuff snapped around her right wrist, the other followed swiftly, and the chain between them rattled like a death knell for the tyranny she had wielded so effortlessly. Her eyes darted around, trying to find an ally, a neighbor, some unseen force to bail her out. There was nothing. No one came to her aid. No one had ever dared. Tonight, that fear she had used to control everyone else became her own prison. The neighbors peeked from behind drawn curtains, whispers spilling into the cool night air like timid echoes. Some pointed fingers in disbelief. Some shook their heads. Some wept quietly, ashamed they had let her reign continue unchecked. They had lived in fear, had allowed small cruelties to go unchallenged, had whispered her praises or tolerated her threats to avoid confrontation. And now, as she was led away, the reality of what she had done, what she had tried to get away with for so long, finally began to sink in. Their queen of intimidation, the self-appointed enforcer of every petty rule, had fallen. The flash of cameras and the low murmur of officers on radios surrounded her as she was guided to the waiting vehicle. Her protests had diminished to a whimper. The air seemed heavier with the weight of her crimes, and yet no words could reverse the damage she had caused. No excuses could bring back the lives she had harmed, the fear she had sown. She realized finally that power built on lies and cruelty was fragile, and now it had crumbled. I watched from a distance, silent, every muscle still tense from months of preparation, investigation, and anticipation. The flash drive, the evidence, the hours of planning and observation, every detail had led to this moment. The officers had acted on the proof I had collected, proof so thorough that even the cleverest lawyer would struggle to shield her from the consequences. The FBI, my colleagues, would review everything, but I had ensured there could be no escape, no loophole, no misstep that she could exploit. Justice, in its purest form, had been delivered. Later at the cemetery, I knelt beside my mother's grave. The flowers I had placed earlier were still fresh, vibrant against the muted gray of the tombstone. I pressed my badge into the soft earth, the cool metal heavy in my palm. For years it had been a symbol of duty, of responsibility, of a career built to protect people from harm. Tonight it was different. It was a promise kept. It was a testament to the fact that no one could take her from me without paying a price, no matter how powerful or untouchable they believed themselves to be. I traced the letters on the gravestone with my fingers, remembering her laugh, the way she used to greet me every morning, the gentle way she offered advice even when she worried I might not listen. Her life had been stolen in a moment of unthinkable cruelty, but I had honored her memory, preserved her dignity, and delivered justice on her behalf. I closed my eyes and let the breeze carry her laughter back to me, the echo of a world before fear, before pain, before Karen's tyranny. The street was quiet now, the kind of silence that feels almost sacred. The sun began to rise slowly, bathing the neighborhood in a golden hue that made every fence, every lawn, and every house look ordinary again. But nothing about this neighborhood would ever be ordinary for me. The shadow Karen had cast would linger for a lifetime, a reminder of what unchecked cruelty could do, and of the lengths someone willing to act with skill, precision, and determination would go to dismantle it. Justice hadn't come from the system in the traditional sense. It hadn't arrived in a courtroom, in a trial, or in a legal maneuver designed to appease lawyers and politicians. It had come from the one person who refused to forget, who refused to let manipulation, fear, or influence allow murder to go unpunished. It had come from a son who knew how to wield discipline, patience, and skill to ensure that right and wrong were not just words on paper, but consequences that could not be ignored. Karen's story, the tale of her arrogance, cruelty, and unchecked power was over. The street she had controlled, the neighbors she had terrified, the small battles she had fought with rules and intimidation, all of it had ended. She would spend her days under scrutiny, facing the legal and social consequences of her actions, stripped of the false authority she had wielded for so long. But my journey was just beginning. I had delivered justice, yes, but the world had shown me how fragile life was, how quickly innocence could be destroyed, and how dangerous it was to let power go unchecked. My mother's loss would never heal completely, and the shadow of her absence would always linger. The neighborhood might resume its quiet rhythms, lawns might be mowed, doors might be painted, but the lesson remained. Cruelty left unchallenged invites disaster, and those who underestimate the consequences of their actions invite retribution. I stood up, leaving the badge where it lay beside the flowers, a silent vow that her sacrifice had meaning, that her memory would be honored, and that no act of violence would ever go unanswered under my watch. The sun rose higher, and I walked back toward the street, toward the neighborhood that had witnessed it all, my resolve unshakable, my purpose clear. Karen had fallen. Justice had been served. But the path ahead demanded vigilance, courage, and a steadfast refusal to allow darkness to flourish. Her reign was over. The street could breathe again. And as I moved forward, I carried my mother's strength, my own training, and the certainty that the wrongs inflicted by those who believe themselves untouchable would always be met with the relentless force of justice.